Hey everybody, Treddy here bringing you some replay tournament commentary with a quick deck tech of the Neoform Atraxa deck in Pioneer. This is the list that I won the Pioneer Challenge with on Sunday just gone, the 9th of April. The previous weekend, I won a 34-player ORCQ in Dublin with the deck also. So I was feeling pretty confident going into this tournament. I've been playing the deck a lot on Magic Online. The paper meta the week before certainly wasn't ready for it. I think a lot of people just didn't know what the deck even did. So some people might need this deck tech before we go into the matches. But on Magic Online, it's certainly been a known quantity for a little while now. Tedboy has done really well with the deck. He won the Modern Showcase challenge with the deck and top 8'd, I believe, the Showcase qualifier. Almost qualifying for the mocks with the deck. So I know Tandy was the one who I think originated the idea, and then maybe Tedboy iterated on it, but it was Tedboy that I heard of the idea from. I saw a tweet on Twitter and just thought this looks super, super sweet. So I decided to start playing the deck. The reason being, no other deck really before this had really grabbed me in Pioneer. It was a format where I just never felt comfortable really playing anything, never felt like I had an edge with any deck. And I said, okay, this looks powerful. It looks like it has a lot of play to it, so let's give this a go and see how we do. So for those who don't know how the deck works, we have 4 Neoforms. What Neoform says is 2 mana, sacrifice a creature, and you go get a creature with the sacrifice creature's mana value +1, put it onto the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So the little cheap trick we're playing here is that both Hooting Mandrills and Tasker the Golden Fang are 6 mana value creatures that you regularly play for 1 mana or 2 mana, usually 1 mana ideally in this deck. So you get to play a 1 or 2 mana creature, then cast a 2 mana spell. Search your library for Atraxa Grand Unifier. That's going to come onto the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, as if the card wasn't outrageous enough as is. So you get an 8/8 flying Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink flyer, and you get to look at the top 10 cards of your deck, put 1 of each type into your hand. So this usually draws you, between 3 and 5 cards, but whatever it is, it's usually good enough. So in order to fuel the graveyard for your delve creatures, we're playing 4 Founding the Third Path. I was searching for these at the ORCQ and was not able to secure a 4th copy for a loan, so I only got to play 3 of these. Weirdly, kind of the best card in the deck, in a way. Not a card I thought I would ever register for a constructed tournament. But this is a 2 mana saga that first lets you play a 1 or 2 mana sorcery from your hand for free, which we have plenty of. The second chapter lets you mill target player for 4 cards. That's going to be yourself, obviously, in this case. And then the third chapter lets you essentially flash back an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. So this is really good for fueling your graveyard, getting a little more interaction with an extra Thoughtseize, an extra Consider, an extra strategic planning on the third chapter, or if you've milled a Neoform with the second chapter and can put a delve creature into play before the third chapter goes off, you can do that. So this is really just the kind of the glue that binds the deck together in a way. It's really, really good, especially in game 1. Obviously, when people bring in graveyard hate, it can look pretty embarrassing post board, but we'll talk about that. And then we have strategic planning, 2 mana, look at the top 3, put 1 into your hand, and you put the rest into your graveyard. So this is putting 3 total cards into your graveyard, which is halfway to delving a creature in terms of mana cost. 2 considers I have in this list. You can play basically any number, I think, between probably 2 and 4 considers in this list, maybe 1 and 4. 2 Otherworldly Gaze. I think the stock kind of list that Tedboy has in his guide is playing 3 gazes usually. I cut 1 for an extra land just because I'm a coward in that way. 21 lands just didn't feel like enough to me. I went for a second basic in the challenge just because I thought, one of the fail cases of this deck is just getting Boseju'd or Field Ruined or something like that on your sources, and you know, it can just be terrible. Obviously, with Boseiju, you can get one of your shocks, but it can still be awkward. And Field of Ruin can be devastating if you're playing 1 or even 0 basics. I have had lists where I ran 0 and it was fine. I was greedy, ran maybe a second Boseiju. I've ran an Otawara in place of the island. That's been great too. So 21, 22 lands, you know, and there's a couple of different ways you can build the lands here. I'm sure this isn't a perfect mana base, but it gets the job done, I would say. And then in terms of interaction with the opponent, so we can actually achieve our goals before we die or before, you know, our spells don't get countered or whatever, we have 4 Thoughtseize, one of the best cards in Pioneer. This is a great deck for it. 4 Fatal Push, I mean, just self-evidently one of the best removal spells in Pioneer. I will note that it's pretty tough to get Revolt in this deck. You know, obviously we're not playing any fetch lands. We've no way to generate treasures or anything like that. But one thing that you might not think of is that Founding of the Third Path with the Chapter 3, if you flashback a Fatal Push with this, what'll happen is you'll exile the Fatal Push from your graveyard, you'll copy it, you will choose to cast the copy, putting the Fatal Push on the stack with a target, and at that point, the Founding of the Third Path chapter has finished resolving and it goes to your graveyard immediately before the Fatal Push resolves. So that means you will always have Revolt by the time the Fatal Push resolves. This is a really important interaction for killing many problem creatures. You know, in Pioneer, Shealdred comes to mind. Just various 4-drops that are very strong, or 3-drops, you know, like a Brutal Cathar or something that has your Atraxa or your Tasker under it or something like that. It can get rid of that. So that is one way that you can get Revolt from Fatal Push. Another way is after you get your Atraxa into play, you've just sacrificed a creature to Neoform, right? So that's turning on your Revolt to kill a creature as well. And then to round out the interaction, we have 3 Stubborn Denial. I'm a Stubborn Denial lover for many years. I used to play Grixis Death Shadow in Modern back when Tassiger was also in the deck. So that's one reason I love this deck. Getting to play Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, Stubborn Denial, Tassiger feels like a nice throwback to me for an era of Modern that I really liked. And this is just a great shell for it. I tried really hard over many leagues to fit in the 4th copy of Stubborn Denial. I just couldn't do it. 3 is just enough copies game 1, and then post-board, I even tried playing one in the sideboard. There are just better options for sideboard cards than a 4th Stubborn Denial. One of the problems with this card is that when you are going off for your combo, which is a lot of the time what you want to protect in sideboard games, very often you only have the 1 Delve creature on board that you've just sacrificed, right? So in between sacrificing your Hooting Mandrills and getting your Atraxa into play, you don't have Ferocious anymore. So it's just a 4 spike. It's not a negate. So that's one issue and one reason why maybe we're not maxing out on the 4 Stubborn Denials. I could see builds where 4 is correct, but I just haven't found it yet myself. So that's every card in the main deck. In terms of the mana base, we're just playing 1 Boseiju. Obviously a superstar. You really want at least 1 copy of this card as Leyline of the Void and Rest in Peace get more popular with rising popularity of this deck and with Greasefang being so popular. I could see a second Boseiju being possible, but it would definitely want to be in the 22nd land slot. You wouldn't want to play 2 of these with 21 lands, I don't think, because it is legendary. It only taps for 1 color in a deck that has extremely constraining mana requirements on all its spells. Obviously, Atraxa being the superstar there, but that's not really usually an issue. But in terms of wanting to say, okay, I want to Thoughtseize into play a Tassiger into Neoform on turn 4 or 5, say, that is just extremely heavy mana requirements, and having 2 lands that are the same legendary in your deck that both only tap for green is just going to be very difficult for you. But this card is obviously, whoops, what did I remove from the deck just now? 21, I removed a land. Botanical Sanctum, I think. Yes, it was Botanical Sanctum. Sorry, I'll just re-add that so the list doesn't look like 59 cards for people. Okay, and then in terms of the sideboard, this has deviated a little bit from Teta Boy's stock type of list. I definitely took major inspiration from him and started off with that. For Rave Enfeeblement, first of all, mono white is a tricky matchup. Obviously, Thalia is great against you. Brutal Cathar is great against you. They have a very fast clock against you. They just have a lot of problem creatures that you got to deal with, and you got to not lose the game before you can go really big, right? So 4 Ray of Enfeeblement is great there. If it was just mono white that was an issue, I would say, okay, maybe we can go down to 3 or something like that. But Greasefang, as I said, is also super popular in the format at the moment, and this is just an easy 4-for-4 swap in the main deck in that matchup with Fatal Push, because it kills Greasefang on their turn, and we have no way to do that with Fatal Push. So it's just a huge upgrade against the Greasefang mirror as well, and you always want a copy in your hand against Greasefang. So for that reason, I think 4 is ideal. Also against Mono White, just having 4 push, 4 Ray of Enfeeblement, and getting to flash those back with Fending the Third Path generally just gives you like a pretty overwhelming amount of removal against them. And honestly, like, the other removal choices at 1 black are not too inspiring either. You could play Blood Chief's Thirst or something like that, but it's sorcery speed. It's rare you're going to be able to pay the kicker cost to kill anything, you know, so I think Ray of Enfeeblement is pretty clearly the way to go here in those matchups. Mystical Disputes, there's no question to me that there should be some number of these in the board. I don't know what it is. I could see it being between 2 and possibly 4. 2 and 3, I would say, is more likely the sweet spot. I went for 3 in this tournament. I feel like this is just such a good protection spell against so many decks, and you know, it's also pretty good bringing it in against, you know, Lotus Field or something like that, where they do have a combo where they're trying to combo off. Obviously, it's going to be good in the mirror and stuff like that as well. I just felt comfortable with 3 copies. This is kind of replacing maybe a Duress. That's one notable thing, is that I have 0 Duress in the board. Most people are running maybe 2 or 3 copies. I found, maybe this is a holdover from just starting to play the deck, but I just found out that I just didn't want to board that many cards in a lot of these matchups, and I just had enough cards to bring in a lot of the time without needing so many copies of Duress. But since playing this, I have gone back up to 1 copy of Duress, and we'll see in this tournament as we go into the matches that it would have been nice for me to have a couple of copies of Duress in this board as well. So I'm not saying don't play Duress, I just didn't happen to play it in this list. I think it's a perfectly good sideboard card. Aether Gust, great against the mirror, very good against Gruul. Gruul is definitely a matchup that you need help with. Obviously, your Ray of Enfeeblements are not helping at all there. So being able to, you know, put back, you know, their a Crow in War is huge, or, you know, I don't know, they're not already playing Questing Beast or whatever, but just whatever big 4-drop they're slamming down that's going to kill you really fast is really important. The spell is obviously great against mono green as well. A lot of the games against mono green are, you know, you're going to have a Fatal Push and a Thoughtseize, but you're going to have sort of gone for that sort of hand. You're not going to be comboing super fast either. And if you give mono green enough time, they're eventually going to slam a Cavalier, and they're going to find a Planeswalker off it, and then they're going to start going off no matter how much you held them back in the first couple turns. So an Aether Gust is just a really nice card against them. It slows them down a lot. It's a good way to get rid of a resolved Cavalier and attack into one of their Planeswalkers with Atraxa without them getting the death trigger and being able to chump with the Cavalier. It's obviously excellent if you ever face mono red, which is, I don't think, a very good deck in Pioneer, but a lot of people play it. It gets sort of inconsistent results, and you know, some people just play mono red. So again, just having this card is great. So I think you'll sort of know when this card is good to bring in. Mono green, not so popular at the moment. Maybe seeing a bit of a resurgence. So I could see, you know, cutting down to 1 of these, possibly even 0. I wouldn't really like going to 0 if you don't think there's much mono green in your meta. Abrupt Decay is a card I wasn't really sold on at first. I was like, oh, really? Like, can I not just kind of fit in, you know, a second Boseiju or a Tear Asunder maybe, or a Wilt? I am playing a Wilt. But I didn't realize, like, not only does this card sort of kill cards like Rest in Peace, Graveyard Trespasser, obviously in that circumstance, this is something that you have to know. Abrupt Decay cannot be countered, so you do not have to pay the ward cost against Graveyard Trespasser. You can just click no, I would not like to pay, and the spell will still be resolved as ward cannot counter it. But it is also invaluable against spirits, right? So blue-white spirits or Bant spirits, probably your worst matchup, I would say, in the format. It might sound a little weird because you have a bunch of Fatal Pushes, you know, and you have some counter spells and stuff like that, but they just provide a really fast clock against your deck. Their counter spells are really good against you. And even if you resolve an Atraxa, a lot of the time they have Shacklegeist, which taps your Atraxa down every turn. So not only can you not block, you can't even attack and get lifelink. So the Atraxa is effectively doing nothing after it resolves. So Abrupt Decay is a really important tool in that matchup to kill Shacklegeist, to kill Spell Queller, and get your card back, whatever it is. Obviously, that matchup is just brutal in general, but Abrupt Decay is just a jack of all trades in terms of hate cards. It doesn't get every hate card. It doesn't get Leyline of the Void, for example, but it gets a lot of relevant permanents that people are bringing in against you, while also just being a good card against the creature matchups. You're happy to bring this in against mono white, against mono red, against Gruul. You need cards to bring in against Gruul, but specifically against spirits, I would say, is why you want this card in the sideboard. And this is a card that I would say never cut this card, essentially. Sometimes you're going to play tournaments where you don't bring it in all that often. You're like, damn, those were kind of wasted slots. But the match, it's just giving you so many points in the Spirits matchup and sort of matchups like that I think the opportunity cost is just too high to remove this card from your sideboard. The copy of Wilt, this was another inspiration from Teddaboy. A lot of people are playing Tear Asunder, which is 1 and a green instant, destroy artifact or enchantment. But instead of the cycling 2, it has Kicker, 1 and a black. To exile target non-land permanent instead. So you can kill, a planeswalker or a creature or something like that that's annoying you. Personally, I don't really see the need for that. Like, I just don't really see many matchups. Like, say you're playing against blue-white control, right? It's like, you don't really need to win the matchup by, like, killing their Wandering Emperor with a Tear Asunder or whatever. You just, like, you should be just playing around. You should just be able to kill them by comboing off, basically. And like, once you successfully combo off, by thought seizing them, dressing them, countering their spells, you should be able to win the game from there as long as you play carefully. So I just don't really see the niche that Tear Asunder is currently fulfilling. Again, in future, as lists change and stuff like that, it could definitely be good. But the flexibility of Wilt in terms of having cycling, I think, is just invaluable. Oftentimes, like, let's say you're playing against control, and you like blue-white control, and you have this, you leave it up turn 2, and they don't slam the Rest in Peace on turn 2. Let's say you don't have blue mana, you have black and green mana or something like that. You just go, okay, they just don't have Rest in Peace here, right? You're for whatever reason, you're pretty confident they don't have Rest in Peace. You can just cycle this, because if they don't have the turn 2 Rest in Peace and you're able to get a reasonably fast Delve Thread out with a counterspell backup, you don't really care that much about them playing a Rest in Peace after that point. So Wilt is... There's a lot of games where it's very clear when you want it in your hand and when it's no longer needed anymore, right? Like in sort of the black matchups where they have Leyline of the Void, Leyline of the Void, they obviously have to have it in their opening hand, essentially, right? So you're going to know straight away whether your Wilt is, if you're going to use it to blow up their Leyline, or if you're just going to cycle it and see more of your deck. So in my opinion, again, that just makes it a lot more useful in a lot of situations than the Tear Asunder. And again, you just need a certain amount of effects to deal with Leyline. I was talking to my opponent, my finals opponent, after the finals, and he was like, wow, you only had 2 ways to get rid of my Leyline in game 2. You just had the Boseiju and you just had the Wilt that you brought in from the board. So I was like, yeah, that's true. But at the same time, I have so much card selection. I got these Considers, these Gazes, these Strategic Plannings, and the game is slowing down a lot when your opponent brings in a Leyline of the Void as well, right? Especially if they mulligan for it and then they put it in from their hand, then they essentially have 5 cards to play the game with. So you're not really going to be under a fast clock. So you don't need a million answers to Leyline of the Void. Specifically as a card, but the Wilt is a really nice one. Again, if it rises in popularity, maybe the second Boseiju is a good choice. Maybe another Naturalize is a choice. I've played lists where I played 1 Assassin's Trophy, which is a really good card. It's again great in sort of the creativity mirrors, because it's just going to kill their Atraxa or whatever. Kills big, if they manage to resolve it to Fairy Hero of Dominaria and get ahead as control or something like that, it kills that. So that's another option in this sort of style. And then this is the last 2 slots in the deck that I've been asked about a lot, which are the 2 monsters to bring in from the sideboard. So these are the cards I'm least sure about in the deck, and I'm more confident in one than the other. So let's start with the one that I'm more confident in. Hornet Queen, I think, is great. I picked this up from looking at, I believe it was McWinsauce first played this, or certainly that's the first list I saw in a preliminary. I think he just had one in the sideboard. And I just thought that's really interesting. So at first I was like, I kind of had the knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people have, which is this is a Jegantha deck, right? We're not playing more than one of any colored pip in our main deck, so we can use Jegantha as our companion. I'll talk a bit more about Jegantha later after these cards, but that's the main thing. If you bring in your Hornet Queen, or as we'll talk about, your Tyrannix Rex, you can no longer announce Jegantha as your companion because you're breaking the rule for it. So that's a big deal because their Jegantha is very, very good in this deck. So I said, is this really good enough? But then there was sort of this rise in people playing these mono black mid-range decks that had like 2 or 3 Sheoldred's Edict in the main, 4 Liliana of the Veil, it just all this removal that was just making it hard to stick in Atraxa, basically, right? Because, even you would resolve the Neoform, you would get the Atraxa, and then even in response to the trigger, they would be able to cast Sheoldred's Edict and kill it before you were able to find your Stubborn Denial or whatever. It's an instant speed answer that's going to get rid of your Atraxa. Okay. Magic Online will be taken offline in an hour. Okay, I might have to record the matches after this deck tech, then I'll split up the videos just to be safe. But Hornet Queen obviously is extremely good against Edict effects because it's creating 5 bodies on the battlefield. So you're getting a 3/3 Death Touch flyer because it's coming in with a counter. That is actually a pretty big upgrade in terms of clocking and hitting planeswalkers in terms compared to a 2/2. And you're getting 4 1/1s with flying and Death Touch also. So Edicts are now extremely embarrassing against you. You now have an army that can easily take down opposing planeswalkers. And it's just going to be very difficult to kill, maybe people are leaving in sort of Extinction Event against you, right? Because, because your Atraxa is an odd cost and they can kill that or whatever. But it's like, and the control decks are leaving in a couple of Supreme Verdict against you most likely because it's uncounterable and it's a 4-mana way for them to kill your Delve Threat or your Atraxa guaranteed. But in general, like, sweepers are obviously not really the way to play against this deck apart from those 2 cases. So Hornet Queen just creating so many bodies is just like really strong. And in a case where you think like, oh, I'm just finding myself in a lot of situations in a matchup where getting the Atraxa, they have a good game plan against it. It's a good option to be able to bring in the Hornet Queen. This card's also good against decks that are going to run extraction effects against you, such as Necromentia, Stonebrain. Slaughter Games is played in the 5-color Bring to Light mid-range deck. In that case, it's a lot more reasonable for your opponents. Whoops, removing cards from the deck again. It's a lot more reasonable for your opponents to remove the Atraxas from your deck rather than the Neoforms, right? And the reason for that is you can eventually hard cast the Atraxa because you have 4 mana confluences in your deck, and you can you can get the Jegantha. Obviously, in the cases where you bring in the Hornet Queen and stuff, you can't get the Jegantha. But generally, right, in game 1, especially versus the Slaughter Games, which is main decked often, they're going to be taking your Atraxas. And often post-board, it's still the best option for them to do that, even if they know that you've brought in other targets for the Neoform, because they're just going to go, listen, they could Neoform me next turn and get Atraxa, and then it's game over. Yeah, maybe they have other targets that they can Neoform into, but like, but I need to get rid of the Atraxa, right? So if they're doing that, then these are really good just because you have other Neoform targets you can get, and your Neoforms aren't dead. And if they take your Neoforms instead of your Atraxa, that's not quite as good for you, but you can still hardcast your Atraxas, and you have more big draws to cast these big old 7-drops. And that sounds pretty unlikely. I realize that you're going to hardcast these guys, but keep in mind the play patterns in these games, the way they play out. If your opponent is, say, spending turn 3 casting Necromentia, or casting turn 4 playing Slaughter Games and not affecting the board, And in the case of Necromentia, maybe even giving you a zombie or two, you know, when they take the cards from your hand, or drawing you cards when they play the Stone Brain and do that. These games are going to go long, and you're going to play a lot of land drops, and you are going to be able to get to the required mana to cast these big spells. So it's better than it looks, I would say. I'm not going to say like hard casting a Hornet Queen is like a super incredible play that you should be aimed to be doing every game, but it's a situation that comes up more often than you would think. So that's kind of the basis behind Hornet Queen. The other card is Tyrannix Rex, which is a super sweet Phyrexian dinosaur from the newest set. So 7-drop, mythic buddies with Atraxa, Phyrexian buddies. So this is a 7 mana, 8/8, can't be countered, trample, ward 4, haste, toxic 4. The toxic 4 is obviously flavor text essentially in our deck, because it's very difficult to think that we would hit them with this 3 times and for them to not already be mega dead to damage as well as poison. Although I guess it could happen against like angels or something like that if they've gone up to like 300 life or something like that. Maybe toxic from this guy becomes our win condition in some bizarre situation. Who knows? I mean, Hornet Queen's probably also pretty good against angels, right? It just comes up the board. But I haven't tried that. Don't quote me on that. But the reason I wanted this was for against control. A lot of the way the control games play out, it's like in some scenarios, yes, Jegantha is really good because, say, on turn 3 when they leave up 3 mana and you either know they have absorb or whatever counter spell, or you just guess there's a good chance they might have it. You can just spend your 3 mana putting Jegantha into your hand, and you've progressed your plan and they haven't gotten to use their mana. That is really good, and that often happens in game 1, especially. That's very often the play pattern. In post-board games, I don't know. I think it's still a good plan, and it still happens like relatively often, but control is already a hard matchup, and like winning quote unquote the normal way against control is like just becomes very unlikely post board. Like resolving a delve threat is one thing, and that becomes your main plan, just trying to beat them down with 4 power every turn, because like after that, ever getting the opportunity really to Neoform, to like voluntarily sack your creature and open yourself up to a counterspell, it's just the risk reward is just so against you in so many situations, compared to just like, I'm just going to leave my delve creature in play and maybe have a stubborn denial, and then eventually they're going to have to supreme verdict my 1 delve creature and I'll just play another delve creature, right? That's kind of what happens a lot. So in that circumstance, I think like Tyrannix Rex is very interesting, specifically because of hard casting it and it being unable to be countered and killing them extremely quickly. Because I believe you should have basically already gotten in for your 8 damage or your 4 or 6 damage, depending on how much they shock or whatever. By that point, you've probably hit them with a delve creature a couple of times. They've shocked once or twice. So this is going to finish the game really fast. Ward 4 is absolutely enormous. It may as well say hexproof, right? Unless they have specifically, a Teferi, not even really a Teferi hero Dominarian player, right? Because then you would just kill it with the Tyrannix Rex. Again, like a Wandering Emperor, you should play around. You should have the answer to it. So if their only answers are like, normal targeted removal spells, this is just never getting targeted, basically, right? So it's going to finish the game extremely fast. So that's why I wanted it against control. Honestly, I don't really know how it's performed. I'm very unconfident about the place for both of these creatures in the deck. I do believe if you do want to break the Jegantha rule in the sideboard, these are 2 good creatures to pick. Multiple times I've gone through Scryfall and I've looked for other creatures to fill this 7-drop slot to Neoform into that are interesting. There's really very little meat on the bone there. You know what I mean? I think these are basically the best options. There are some creative options that I've seen people like Tyrol X or whatever, the guy who puts slime counters on stuff like that. I just don't. I think it's cute. I don't think the sheer power level is there to be worth breaking the Jegantha rule. But for these two, I'm unsure still. Even if I won the challenge with this list, I'm still not 100% that many of these choices are correct in the long run. And then the last card to talk about is Jegantha. So let's put this in the middle. So Jegantha is one of the companions from Ikoria that sent Magic into absolute chaos after they were printed. For those who weren't around at the time playing, the companion is maybe the most broken mechanic that Wizards have ever printed. I would put it probably worse than Storm on the Storm scale. It should probably be called the companion scale now. Although they have said maybe I think it's something they will revisit. I think one of the major reasons being they had to nerf this mechanic in the Magic rules after they printed it because it was so strong. You can see on this card, it says, if this card is your chosen companion, you may put it into your hand from outside the game for 3 generic mana as a sorcery. Originally, when they printed these cards, you didn't have to do that. The card was just in your sideboard and you could just cast it from there. So you didn't have to pay the 3 additional mana to put it in your hand and cast it from your hand. So multiple companions banned in many formats. Lurrus of the Dream Den, famously, I think the only card to ever be banned in Vintage for power level reasons rather than, anti or dexterity or racism reasons. So that's showing you how powerful these guys are. And Jegantha is one of the remaining companions that we are still allowed to play with. After they've banned Lurrus, and now in Modern they've banned Yorion as well. You can still play with Yorion in Pioneer as well. But so, okay, the baseline for a companion, just having essentially an extra card available to you at all times during the game for the low cost of 3 mana is fundamentally broken, right? If like in decks where this is just a vanilla 5/5, like for example Tron in Modern, mono green Tron, they often just play this card anyway because they're like, listen, maybe the only double costed cards I really want in my deck are Dismember or Force of Vigor or something like that, and they go, it's worth the while to give up those cards to be able to have Jegantha in my sideboard. And when they Blood Moon me, for example, when I'm playing Tron in Modern, I'm able to just casually, tap 3 of my now mountains to get my Jegantha and then cast it, off my 1 forest or sorry, you don't even need the forest, it casts off red. Yeah, so if you could imagine, that's just an extremely useful scenario to have access to. There's so many games in Magic, especially when you're a combo deck like this, right? Where the game slows down, it peters out, you both Thoughtseize each other or counter each other's spells into oblivion. You're both in a top deck war, except for you're not in a top deck mode because you can just get your Jegantha and play your Jegantha, right? So that's the base floor of the card, already extremely strong. Now we talk about what it does in this deck specifically and why I believe this is the best Jegantha deck I've ever played. I wasn't really following this card closely when the companions originally got printed, so maybe there was a better one, before, but I believe this is the best Jegantha deck I've seen anyway, which is Jegantha's ability, alongside being a huge 5/5 for 5, is tap for a WUBRG. This mana can't be spent to pay generic mana costs. This is normally like, okay, it's not that good in a lot of decks. You're like, all right, at this turn I can, let's say the rest of our deck, maybe I can Thoughtseize you and I can cast 1 blue and I can use the blue to pay for 1 mana of my strategic planning. But I can't use the red, the green, and the white this turn. So it's still tapping for 2 mana in that circumstance. That's still pretty good. But more than likely, I probably just want to attack with my 5/5 than use it for that, right? That seems like probably a better play a lot of the time. But Atraxa Grand Unifier, I don't know if you've noticed this, has a lot of different colored mana symbols in her mana cost. And Jegantha pays for 4 of the 7 mana that this card costs to hardcast. This is an absolutely outrageous interaction. It's absolutely ridiculous. So in game 1s against control, or let's say, when your combo's been stopped or whatever, turn 3 or turn 4, you have nothing else to do. And let's say you've already drawn one of your Atraxas, right? You have 3 in the deck. You've just naturally drawn 1. You couldn't do anything about it. You just get to put your Jegantha in hand. On turn 5, let's say, again, you have nothing better to do. You just cast the Jegantha. your opponent is like, oh man, okay, they have a 5/5. But they're like, at least they can't Neoform it, right? It's 5 mana, so that is important. It doesn't Neoform into Atraxa, because Neoform only lets you get a +1 creature. You can Neoform it into a Tasigur or a Hooting Mandrills, and then you can Neoform that into an Atraxa, which is also a play I've made. And I believe I maybe made in this challenge. I'm not sure. We'll see when I get to go through the replays. But you can just hardcast it. And so this is a turn 6 Atraxa in the best case scenario. And a lot of opponents are simply not going to be able to deal with that, especially after you've thrown some interaction back and forth. And maybe they've thought like, okay, I've dealt with the graveyard, or I've killed 2 delve creatures, you know, some combination of that. They can't delve anything else for a couple turns. I'm pretty safe. And then you just hardcast and Atraxa and the game's over. It's absolutely absurd. So best Jegantha deck ever. Again, it's a 5/5. If you got a Tasigur and a Jegantha on the battlefield, that's 9 power that you're attacking for every turn as well. And that's kind of the fail case of this deck, right? Like the nut draw with this deck is a turn 3 Atraxa if you're playing against a deck, like let's say you're just playing against, you know, like Gruul or something. Well, not Gruul, because they could have a Crone War. Let's say you're playing against like Mono Red or something like that. Yeah, turn 3 Atraxa, right? You just play a spell turn 1, turn 2, you know, fending the third path into whatever, and then turn 3 you can play a delve threat and then immediately Neoform, right? So this now has 60. Oh, because I put the Jegantha in, yeah. So that's the nut draw. A lot of games, you're not going to do that. If you think your opponent has interaction, you're going to wait till turn 4, so you have a Stubborn Denial up or a Thoughtseize to clear the way first, especially if you have a Fending in the third path and play about to go off, because that's going to let you flash back your Thoughtseize. Not so good with Stubborn Denial, but, you know, they can't give us everything. And, you know, this deck is just really good. Again, Control is a hard matchup, stuff like that. I think Bring to Light 5 color is a hard matchup. But this deck does extremely well, in my opinion, against Red-Black midrange, Abzan Greasefang. You know, after board, I think it does perfectly fine against humans. I think it does well against Lotus Field because you have so many Thoughtseizes, so much counter magic. I think maybe Mono Green is about 50-50. If Mono Green was super popular, I might have to rebuild this deck or try something else. But just against a lot of these top decks in Pioneer, this deck is just doing really well. I think it's underplayed. I think it's super powerful. And I will be back in the next video, guys, to bring you the challenge replays, and I'll talk through all of those. I'm going to have to do that later on today, as Magic Online is going down in the meantime. But thanks so much for watching. Please give me a like and a subscribe if you enjoyed the video. This is my first foray into solo Magic content, and I do want to give it a go, make some more videos for you guys, maybe start streaming again, stuff like that. So let me know if you enjoyed the content and any suggestions for future videos. Thank you so much.